everybody. Welcome to the first in our series of conversations with English UK London champions. My name is Sian Matos. I'm the Vice Chair of English UK London and the Principal at TTI School of English in Camden Town. Over the next few weeks, we'll be talking to industry champions and leaders about how we can support each other in the reopening of our schools and the reopening and promotion of our amazing capital city. Today, I'm so pleased to welcome Ruth Hughes from Curious Human. Ruth is a positive psychology consultant, has been a great support to us here at English UK London and also to our members during this lockdown period, delivering not one but two webinars about mental health. Last week, Ruth delivered the most recent of these webinars, focusing on how we can best help our staff and students ease the anxiety that might be caused by returning to work after lockdown. A really warm welcome to you, Ruth. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. The webinar last week was really fascinating, and you started it with a poll asking the attendees how they're feeling about the future. It was quite an even spread of results, I thought, actually, or even though slightly pessimistic, polled highest, I thought they were fairly well distributed across the positive and slightly negative options that you gave us. Was it a result that you were expecting to get?
I wasn't surprised by the result. I mean, if you look at the evidence in terms of people's mindsets, Martin Seligman and others have done quite a lot of work on optimism as part of positive psychology, and people tend to have either an optimistic or a pessimistic outlook, and there's no right or wrong. In fact, biologically, it makes sense for people to anticipate a realistic problem, and it helps keep people safe, sort of thinking about, well, what could go wrong, what can I do in advance, providing it doesn't tip over into worry. But actually, with the title of that particular webinar being Coping with Fear and Anxiety when going back to work after lockdown, I was expecting that people wanting to attend might be people who are anxious, at least, about the future, if not pessimistic.
Sure, no, absolutely, that makes sense, that they want that extra support, which is right. What we're here for, I hope.
Yeah.
And just something that I've noted, that sort of this whole easing of lockdown is actually more complicated than I thought it was going to be. This is the part that we're coming out, it's a more positive, we're in a more positive frame of mind. But actually I'm finding, and I think from what I've read and seen, perhaps other people are finding it too, that it's actually driving a little bit more anxiety. It's kind of like you take one step forward, but then perhaps two steps back. It's just this, it's the unknown, isn't it, I suppose, more than anything.
Well, we're still in, if you like, a liminal phase of change. So the whole of COVID situation has put people in a position where things are changing, where they don't know what's going to happen going forward. And despite the fact that we're coming out of lockdown, this isn't the end of COVID, and people are really aware of that. So I don't know if you saw my first webinar where I was talking about the Kubler-Ross curve. So that where it was originally devised where people were given terminal diagnosis, but it's used a lot for bereavement, and it can be used for any kind of trauma where people perceive themselves or their loved ones to be at actual risk or threat of serious injury or death. And COVID does that. People don't know. It's an actual injury that's happening to members of our community, whether we know all of them personally or not. So reactions like shock, denial, frustration, anger, depression, sadness, and then testing, trying new things, and gradually acceptance and moving forward are all normal reactions, but they don't happen smoothly in a curve. We bounce around and we go backwards and forwards. So we've got used to lockdown, and we've entered our own routines, and we found a way of it working, and now that's changing. And so we're going into a new phase of change where we actually don't know what the result will be. And there is a real risk. I mean, people who are anxious about the risk of COVID are not being melodramatic or foolish. If we don't handle this change responsibly and sensibly, there is a risk of incidences of a disease that is very novel, which we don't have a cure for, becoming an increasing concern in our community. So I'm absolutely, I think anxiety is not only normal, but it's actually quite sensible. But it's how we manage that. And we talked at the beginning about having a naturally optimistic or pessimistic frame of mind.
Yes.
Awareness is really key, because even if you have a negative frame of mind, if you're aware of it and you think, oh, okay, instead of just thinking, oh, it's all awful, the future's frightening, you can notice, I had a thought that the future is frightening. Okay, that ties in with my awareness that I have quite a pessimistic frame of mind.
Sure.
Shall I test the thought? But even in the fact that you've become aware of that thought, you're stepping out of being in the thought, of being fused with it. And you're able to think, okay, so is it logical? Actually, yes, it's logical. We're in this state of change. What can I do? And you might need to work on one of two things. You might need to work on your risk assessment. So why am I particularly afraid about what's happening? Is it because of how I'm traveling into work? What can I do to modify that? Would it be possible, for example, for me to cycle instead of going on public transport? And if it isn't, what else could I do? Can I make sure I've got hand sanitizer with me? Can I make sure I'm wearing a mask? So whilst recognizing that the risk is real, you're actually taking steps to modify the risk. And if there's a circumstance where you think, well, actually the risk here isn't real, this is me being over anxious, you can take steps to work on your mindset and your frame of mind. And there are plenty of strategies that you can use to help deal with that anxiety.
Sure, and you talked about some of those strategies in the webinar last week, right. And I know that James has shared that amongst our members, so people can catch up with the full recording. But one of the things that I think we were all struck by was your cake analogy.
Right.
We all loved the cake analogy, and just making us think about the good and bad in situations, and I think building up resilience as well, which is really, really important at the moment. And I was just wondering if you could just go through that. Could you recap the cake analogy?
Yeah, I mean, I wish it was my cake analogy. It actually comes from ACT, which is acceptance and commitment training, which is a really brilliant. There was originally acceptance and commitment therapy, which came from CBT. It's kind of the grandchild of cognitive behavioral therapy, and I use elements of different kinds of helpful thinking in the workshops and coaching that I do, but it's essentially about understanding your own perspective and not judging. So if the analogy for those who haven't seen the workshop is cake good or is cake bad? Because when we pass judgment on different situations, including how we feel, if I was saying, oh, I'm feeling anxious about traveling to work after lockdown, that's bad, I should not feel like that. You then have two problems. You have the problem of feeling anxious, but you have the problem of judging yourself for feeling anxious. So it can be more helpful to think, okay, I have this feeling. Not it's a good feeling, not it's a bad feeling, but it's a feeling and it's there. And then perhaps being curious about it. Is there a good reason for having the feeling? And then thinking instead of, this is bad, I must get rid of it, or this is good, I must keep it. Where do I want to be in accordance with my values? So if my value is contribution to the economy or financial security for my family. So what I want to do is to be able to contribute to rebuilding an economy, to support my family in this instance, to feel free, perhaps,
Yeah.
after having felt cooped up for a while, then what I actually do want to do is to take part in this going back to work. If my priorities and my values were really, risk aversion at all costs,
Yeah.
and I need to protect somebody in the family perhaps who's shielding, who's vulnerable, you might make a different decision.
Sure.
But that analogy is, not is this good or bad, but what do I want to achieve? And is this thing helpful or not helpful in me achieving what I need to achieve?
Sure. No, that's great. I found that analogy really, really useful, really helpful, just to try and see the good and the bad. And also, another point that I picked up from the webinar, which was really, really practical advice that you gave us when we were talking about communicating within our organisations.
Right.
So obviously we have teams of staff and our students to support now, and
right.
they're going to be feeling anxious about coming back to school, or staff coming back to work. And you were just saying that communication is the key to reassuring them, to supporting them. And just if you could elaborate on this, or any top tips for that, for the kind of way we should be communicating.
Yeah, I think it's not dissimilar to what I was just saying about the cake analogy, which is, where do you as an organisation want to be? What are your organisational values? And what are the aims of the stakeholders? Because there'll be very different people listening to this who've got different kinds of organisations. So if the aim of your organisation is to improve language learning, for example, what is most useful in your actions now to be able to do that?
Right.
What about your students? What is important to them? How can you as an organisation best help them?
Yeah.
So if you then set out those aims, you reiterate in terms of your communication, you're looking for solutions, and you're looking for shared aims and shared values. And then you're looking at how can we together best achieve these things as safely as possible, taking into account the risks. Because I used another analogy in the webinar, which is being a ship. A ship is safest in harbour.
Yeah, but
ships are built and designed to sail, and language schools might be much safer with nobody in them, but then they're not going to be able to achieve their aims, and I mean, what is the purpose of a school? Is something I've seen coming up more and more at the moment. Is it just about imparting information, or is it more than that? Is it about a human experience? Is it about connecting? Is it about sharing cultures and understanding and working together in a way? We can impart information, and schools have been amazing, language schools and other schools, at transmitting information via Zoom. We just talked before we started about how much we've had to learn and how fantastic this technology is. But does it do everything that we want to be able to do? So it's a bit of a long-winded answer, I'm sorry. But it's about really thinking, going back to your values. What do you want to achieve? And then what do we want to achieve in common?
Yeah.
And then how can we involve the community in helping us achieve that together as best as possible, taking in account that the risks and the fears that people feel are real, so when we examine the evidence, is there an actual risk? If so, what can we do to mitigate it and take action, to make people physically safer? And if it's a mental risk, would well-being training help? Would ACT help? Would this kind of support? Regular communication, not just telling people what to do, but asking how they are and checking in how it's going, and revisiting people's aims with regard to a changing and evolving situation. So, I did quite a lot of work with schools at the initiation of COVID, and the schools that were successful at handling it, revisited their plan. There were
Yeah.
some schools that kind of made a plan and then stuck to it, but it wasn't a rigid situation. It was an evolving situation. So, you know, we've said we're doing this and now we're going to do it. Doesn't necessarily work when things are changing in the economy and the environment, and particularly with people's families. And I would say this coming into lockdown, this is going to be true as well. We have a plan to begin with, but it needs revising and it needs communicating, and stakeholders need to be involved with their experiences forming a part of the communication of what's going forward.
No, sure, I agree absolutely. It's the balance of the sort of the physical well-being, and
right.
we've really seen how important our mental well-being is. And I
Right.
think if you've ever sort of been not necessarily dismissive, but not really understood the mental well-being, I mean, this has just brought it all out in the open, and that's the bit that's lacking, isn't it, with schools, whether it's a language school or a mainstream educational establishment. You can see that's what's lacking. And I think all of us that provide English language courses in our lovely language schools, that's what we pride ourselves on. We pride ourselves on that student experience. That's so key to us. Of course, there's the language learning, but we know that we affect students' lives. We change their lives. This is a life-changing experience when they come and study with us. And that's not because they've got English to get to the job that they want to get to. It's because they meet amazing people. They have insight to other cultures. You know, it's so powerful and so valuable. And to sort of balance that with, you know, that the physical well-being as well. It's those two things combined.
And actually, I mean, that was what I was doing before COVID situation happened. Was my specialism in my master's was cultural transition. Right. So I looked at, if you look at the evidence from the research, moving countries is psychologically really damaging. That's pretty much, you know, most of the evidence over the past 20 years said that. But obviously you and I and many of our colleagues know how amazing and powerful it is. So my research was on, you know, what happens in terms of personal growth and positive transformation during cultural transition. And how can we support those elements with people, you know, because we also know some people find it really difficult and they have much more of a challenge. So looking at those elements that actually help support the people through change and having that background has been really useful during COVID, because that's also a cultural transition, a culture shock. And I think... sorry, no, go on. Go ahead. No, I was just going to say that I think what people don't necessarily realise is it impacts your identity as well as the practical. So you know, especially people that haven't lived overseas themselves, they might perceive culture shock just as dressing differently, eating differently, learning a few different behaviours. But it's so much deeper than that, because your very sense of value and belief is broken. You understand that the way that your map of the world worked, the way that you frame things, is different to other people, and they're not necessarily wrong. So there's a whole lot of cognitive processing going on. But actually it makes people stronger, and it gives them this ability, this flexible approach to their own identities, but, you know, psychological flexibility also. And I think on an optimistic level, although lockdown and coming out of lockdown will be really hard, people are already inventing different ways of processing information. And although it's painful to have your map of the world is torn up, you have to draw a new one. Your sense of identity is to some extent broken. You have to rebuild it. But the elements, your values, your beliefs, with which you have to build are there, and they're strong. And you're going to learn to use them in new and different ways. So this is an opportunity. As language schools, there's been a huge step forward in ways of thinking about learning and communication. We can take that back into opening the environments, and it can be better than it was before.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a really important point as well, because language schools work, I think generally one of our strengths is spotting well, it's what we're there for. We're to spot
Right.
culture shock, to support our students in
Right.
that transition. That's what we do.
Yes.
Therefore, that training that we have and that experience that we have, we can now
Yes.
switch it to support
Yes.
them, not only in the culture shock, but also with this change
Absolutely.
in our
Absolutely.
whole world, our what we know.
Yeah.
Our
And
new
especially
normal.
if we consciously think of it like that, okay, this is a culture shock. We know how to do that. We've got that experience. How can we transfer those skills, even to ourselves? And it's funny, you know, I mean, as a positive psychologist, I was a bit shocked at how hard I found lockdown.
Sure.
Because I was thinking, I've got all these strategies, and I
know what
but
to do.
in this, I know what to do here. But it doesn't actually make it easier when it happens, and I think that's true of moving countries too. You find you've got the strategies, you might be quicker to adjust,
Yeah.
but you don't know what you don't know at the time you don't know it. and so that bit where you're having to re-establish cognitive strategies in a world where things are unknown, it's really hard. It's really painful, and that's what you're talking about now. So you know, coming back and saying, oh, it should be freer, well, actually you're not, because you're going into the unknown. And it's really normal and sensible to be a bit anxious and cautious about going forward. That's very sensible behavior.
Good, I'm glad to hear it. Oh, thank you so much, Ruth. And I just wanted to just ask you one last question, if I may. Obviously, we're English UK London, and we're supporting our city with its reopening process as well, and promoting what an amazing city London is. And one of our partners, they're called London and Partners, and they have a campaign going on called Because I'm a Londoner. Now, I know you're not a Londoner, but you're not too far away. So I was wondering, what will be the first thing that you do when you're able to return to London, to come and visit us in the capital? What would you like to do, see?
Oh, I mean, just the energy of being in London is amazing. I might not be, I was born in London. So I was a Londoner till I was 6.
Okay.
And when I retrained and did my masters, I retrained in London, and for me that was an amazing reconnection with feeling younger, feeling energetic, being able to go to the theatre, to the museums, to the galleries. I mean, for me it's a huge sadness that theatre won't be open for a while, but I believe the museums and galleries are opening.
Yeah, I can see the National Gallery is the first one to open. I think next week they're starting reopening, so it's a really good sign.
Yeah, and it's just that sense you're in a place where actually you can be whoever you want to be.
Yeah.
London is a truly multicultural city, and it embraces people wherever they're from. It's got an energy and a tolerance and a culture. And I love it as a city. I mean, one of the reasons I've recently moved down from Lancashire to Kent is because I'm only a short train ride away from London now.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and I can't wait until I'm back in the city and able to experience what London has to offer.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Ruth. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure. It's been a real delight to talk to you.
Thank you.